Good morning, students. I have a few announcements before I get into this article with you guys. So if everyone could make sure they start with going in Canvas today, um, I want to point you to a couple of announcements. First of all, um, good morning, and I'm sorry I'm not there today. I have a cardiologist appointment to check on some issues my heart has. Um, but I wanted to point out to you that we have office hours now, the junior teachers during fourth period. So if you go to the announcements part of Canvas, you'll see that I have a Zoom link available that tells you where to go if you need to meet with me to talk to me about anything for the class. We can meet virtually. But I would encourage you to make an appointment with me because that is my planning period, and I have a lot that I try to do during my planning. So I might not always have the Zoom link open if no one's made an appointment with me. Um, this is the time of the class where a lot of people need one-on-one help with their projects because they might need help finding research or they might need help finding ideas on how to address certain A through G elements for their own papers. So I think that a lot of you would really benefit from having this one-on-one tutoring or just a little meeting with me. If you don't want to call it tutoring, whatever. But that's during fourth period, so I would encourage you to please make an appointment to make sure that you'll get that time. Um, so that's the first announcement. Second announcement. Um, if you go in that page where we created our digital daybooks, I put my example in there. And the reason I did that is because I went down and made an entry for analyzing articles, and I put like a format in there that I'd like you to use for the analyzing articles assignment that we're doing. Something along those lines so that everything is separated out and labeled nicely. So please use something like that. And again, that can be found in the digital daybook assignment, and you can click the link that shows my example and scroll down to the last page, and you'll see it there. And finally, if you have not gotten your book for our class, the Hot Zone, please make sure you come to the school this week to pick it up. Just call the front office and they will either have you come to the door or they will bring it out to you. I'm not sure exactly which one they're doing. Um, but I think that the college books are just about ready, so look for an email from the front office letting you know. As you know, we don't have a receptionist now, so they're trying their best, the office staff, to try to make ends meet. So if the college textbooks are a little bit behind schedule, that's probably why. All right, so now let's look at this article, folks. So this is the third article in our Analyzing Articles assignment. And we've been looking at one of these every day this week, and I've been talking about different things to focus on for these articles, different skills that we can take from them so that we can learn a little bit about the writing process and also the research process. So, this article is called Blogs as a Representation of Student Experiences in a Service Learning Course. All of our articles that we've been looking at are talking about service learning, and basically that means that students can learn by doing community service. Um, you guys know that as teachers, we are trying to teach you certain standards. Like you go to math class and everyone has like standards that we have to get you to learn for math. If you go to English class, we have standards we're trying to get you to learn. But community service learning isn't necessarily a standard that the state gives us. This is an experience that you get that's not necessarily defined by state Common Core standards. But researchers do argue that these experiences are important. And if you look at the title of this article, you will realize that we're going to be dealing with qualitative research, or qualitative evidence here, and qualitative research. And qualitative research is based on people's experiences. A lot of you guys, your topics will require that you have some type of qualitative research in there. In fact, I think that pretty much any of your topics could include that. And the reason that it's important is because we're trying to look at how people have experienced these issues. And student experience is something that we're going to look at in this paper. So this scholarly article is laid out pretty much the same as any other scholarly article that we've looked at and that you will look at for your research. We have the abstract, which is an APA feature that's basically introducing us to what's going on in this paper. And then you get the background of the problem. And then we have the methods, procedure, analysis of the data they collected, results, and finally, discussion. So they discuss the results here. And yes, they have a conclusion. That's what I thought. So as I'm just going to remind you that when you're skimming articles for your research, I would recommend that you start with the abstract, skim that, maybe even read it word for word, although this abstract is kind of long. Then you go down to the conclusion and look at that. Maybe the discussion. And skim then the body of the paper. In skimming, we're looking at the first sentence of every paragraph, and we'll see if any of these paragraphs is going to have some kind of evidence that we can use. So I'm going to go to page 13, and our focus today is going to be looking at how they've used these quotes to act as evidence. If I could find, this is the page 13, I think. Yes, right here. All right. So we're going to read this, these 3 paragraphs right here, and they're kind of longer. So we're going to look at how they use the quotes here. Now remember, for paragraph structure, generally speaking, we're looking at a TEAL format. T standing for topic sentence, E standing for evidence, A standing for analysis, and L standing for link. Okay, so these paragraphs, we're going to look at if they follow that and if they analyze and lead in to all of the evidence that they give. Okay, the experience of being in a service learning class was a new experience for a majority of students. All right, here's our topic sentence. It's just introducing us to what they're going to talk about. All of the quotes and evidence they use should have to do with the fact that it's a new experience and anything related to that. They identified a combination of trepidation and excitement about a new approach to learning and entering a community. Students wrote about the uniqueness of the course. And here we have our first quote. It is so surreal being in this course and very difficult to describe. I kept having to remind myself that I was in school. So this first quote here, you'll notice, is we have a lead-in, and in our lead-ins, pretty much for every quote here, we're not going to have a specific name because they wanted to protect the identities of this, I think it was 17 students that were blogging in their research. So that's one key difference here. Unless you're maybe interviewing someone and you want to protect their identity, you're going to want to add the names of the people that say these quotes pretty much every time. Especially for quotes. You're going to lead into pretty much any kind of evidence that you give, but it's so important for quotes because there's a reason you're picking this as a direct quote. Because you feel that it's so important to say word for word, maybe because it's a primary source, or because it's from an expert in the field, or somebody that has directly experienced this, um, you you want to say who said this direct quote, usually, pretty much every time. And again, the only reason that it's not done here is to protect the confidentiality of the students that were blogging for this research. I wanted to also point out that here we have a colon acting as the punctuation before the quote. The reason for that is because it's an independent clause before the quote. Students wrote about the uniqueness of the course. You see, that could act as a sentence by itself. So because it's an independent clause, we use a colon before the quote. We're going to see lots of examples of using commas and colons before the quotes. So another item here that is different than what your paper will be is the fact they don't have in-text citation. And again, that is to protect the confidentiality of the students. And besides, pretty much the whole paper is about these students' words. So they've already kind of introduced that in the beginning. But mainly it's that confidentiality piece. Let's move on. The characteristics of the community, the poverty and segregation, and traveling 3 hours round trip were a completely new way to experience higher education. One student wrote, "Besides our class, I do not know of many opportunities for students at our university to get involved in rural issues. Here we have our rule about having a verb before the quote. If we have a verb before the quote, we're going to always use a comma. We'll see lots of examples of that. And also we have another example of square brackets. Sometimes you need to add a few words to provide clarity because the quote doesn't flow quite right with your paper unless you add it. They added this, and since it's not originally in the quote, you have to have the square brackets. I wanted to point out that even though we do have a lead-in for each of these quotes, we don't have a lot of analysis happening here. And this is what we call a dropped quote. A quote that's correctly embedded in evidence, in a paragraph, is going to have a lead-in and in-text citation and analysis. You see here that it reads kind of choppy because we looked at this first quote and it said, "It was so surreal being in this course and very difficult to describe. I kept having to remind myself that I was in school." And then it just changes the direction here by saying the characteristics of the community, the poverty and segregation, and traveling 3 hours round trip were a completely new way to experience higher education. One student wrote this. So, I mean, it reads kind of choppy because we're not directly addressing that quote beforehand. And one reason I think that they're doing that is because a lot of these paragraphs here that we're reading, this is the evidence, and then we scroll down here to this next section, and we see that there's a whole section on analyzing that evidence. So that's what this whole discussion section is about. So because this is an APA paper, because this is a research article, they do have that whole section devoted to analysis of the evidence. So that is part of why it is omitted from this paragraph, these paragraphs we're reading. I would argue that even still they read kind of choppy, and I'm not really a big fan of how it's written. Also, you're going to notice here that the lead-ins are kind of redundant. We get a lot of the same types of lead-ins, and it feels almost like too patterned and too basic. I would encourage you to go into um, our page in Canvas that has different examples of lead-ins that you can use. I'm going to stop the video here and